Samuel keeps each of us.
First of all, I'd like to say how much I enjoy the Oldie. I like the articles, but the older I get, the more the advertisements interest me. And what about those lovely motorised immigrants? So, for every reason. And I must say, I'm only 83, and therefore I'm not really old, but I do find that I find old people very, very interesting. I went to a peace meeting in St James, Piccadilly, a week ago, and there were two women of 102 arguing about which of them was older than the other. And then another occasion, I was in Taunton very late one night, and it was foggy and raining, and there was only one cab. And a businessman in front of me said, "Would you like to share my cab?" So I said, "Very kind of you." And he got in the car with his briefcase. He said, "I'm absolutely exhausted. Just come in from Washington. Probably have to go back to New York next week." And the cab driver said, "Oh, he said, I haven't been in Washington for about 70 years. And he was Churchill's bodyguard. He knew Churchill, he knew Stalin, he knew Roosevelt, and I thought, my God, what a story. And my grandmother said something I always remember. I thought she was dying. She wasn't actually, but I was by a bed at the age of 8. She was a Scots lady, and she said something that I really loved. She said, "The great thing about your last journey is you don't have to pack." But there was another problem. I've got somebody wrote to me and said, "I hear you have a peacemaker," which I have. Funnily enough, I heard the Prime Minister's speech in Brighton 2 years ago. Got up to go to the little collapse. Was taken to hospital, given a pacemaker, and there wrote and said, "I hope it wasn't my speech that caused it." But I'm very polite, and I don't. There are problems. I mean, you get a bit deaf. I give you an example, but somebody friend of mine rang me up the other day and said, "My wife's having a baby." And he left his number, and I misread it. And I rang a woman in Liverpool and said, "I'm so glad to hear about your baby." And she said, "Who are you?" I said, "I'm Tony Benn." She said, "I've never met you." And she was now off. So there are differences. And then I was just telling Richard, I hope because as the front to others may know, my age, you do have a lot of problems with your ladder. It takes what the BBC would call unofficial action. And I was in the car outside my publisher the other day, and driving. It was obvious there was going to be what we claimed an accident. And I had a brilliant idea. I looked out of the car, opened the hood, stood in front of the car, in front of the wheel, unzipped, and a man came up and he said, "Sir," I said, "What is it?" He said, "I think I know what your problem is. I believe your radiator's leaking." I said, "Thank you so much. I'll take it straight to the garage." So anyway, but the thing about being a Irish, I'm going to be very limited about time. No, I must be, because I've got to go to the Commons now, I've retired, as you probably know. But the thing about being a Irish, you get 3 bites at your own experience. I don't know about you, but the things that I'm absolutely clear about are what happened to me. And if you're an Irish, it happens, one bite at it, then at night you dictate, and then later you read it and realise you were wrong. And that is the benefit of Irish. And as I look back on my life, the things that have really burned into my mind and couldn't be excluded by anything, a hatred of war. I was in London during the Blitz. I was 14. Every night the siren went off, and when I hear it now, I get frightened by it still. Went down to sleep on the floor of a hairdressing saloon at the bottom of the building, which is now MI5. And one morning, I went to the war in MI5, I could say quite truthfully. And one morning I came up and 500 people had killed us where I lived. And the church I went to, St John's, was bombed, and I saw London burning. And then later my brother was killed, and many of my schoolmates were killed. And I must say, war, the excitement of war, just turns me off, I'm sorry. I'm just bitterly opposed to resolving things by conflict. And yet, of course, in the Middle East, talking about a peace process in one half of it, half the time the other half whipping up a war against Iran. And that is my view, and I think it's yours. And she taught me something that I think was enormously important. We used to read the Bible, and she said the Bible is the story of the conflict between the kings who had power and the prophets who preached righteousness. So she taught me to support the prophets against the king. It's got me into a lot of trouble in life. But I must say, the older I get, the more important that is. And this idea that if you worship a different God, you have a motive to kill people who worship another God. It's quite incredible. Because if you look at the world religion, they'll teach the same thing. Treat other people as you want to be treated yourself. And I think what Bush said, God told him to go to Iran. I didn't know God had an office in the Pentagon, but he said it. And I don't see any distinction between that and Osama bin Laden saying, if you don't do what I tell you, you'll be executed. And once God is on both sides in a war, then there's very little chance of peace. And the third thing I care very much about is whether we have any control over our lives, a democratic argument. And I must admit my attitude to Europe is based not on any nationalism. I'm not a nationalist at all. But when I heard Blair was likely to be the next president of Europe, I did wonder what final achievement of democracy in the coalition would all like. And very simply, I do not see any reason why I should obey a law made by somebody I do not elect, cannot do you watching this now? I brought a professional BBC person with me. But, so those are the three things I care about. But the other thing I'll just say before I finish is this. I have enormous confidence in the younger generation. I've got 4 children and 10 grandchildren, and the grandchildren have now got boyfriends and girlfriends. And I'm waiting for the great-grands to arrive. And one of my grandchildren in love with a job in lawyer. Another's in love with an Iranian. Another's in love with a black American doctor. And I'm breeding a UN peacekeeping force. And my little granddaughter went to school in primary school in London with 77 nationalities and a refugee centre in the school. And when I went to talk, as I did once or twice, I talked to the General Assembly of the UN. And you don't talk to them about multiculturalism. It's nonsense. I mean, it's a lie to have American friends, Muslim friends, Jewish friends, African. And that's the world they've been born into. And I think they sense something else, which is that they're the first generation in human history that has the technology that will allow the human race to be destroyed. Chemical, nuclear, and biological weapons. There's never been true before. Kill 1 or 2 guys with a pike or a bow and arrow. Never do what could be done now. But also the first generation that have the capacity to solve the problem of the human race, the money and the technology. My favourite story, I may have heard it before, when the Russians put remember the race between the Soviet Union and the Americans as to who'd get on the moon first. You don't remember that, at your age you probably would. And the Russians put a space vehicle on the moon. It was a caterpillar track, and it moved across the surface of the moon. I had a letter from a constituent in Bristol saying, "Dear Tony, I see the Russians have put a space vehicle on the moon. Is there any chance of a better bus service in Bristol?" And I think the other people need to be encouraged. And if there's one remaining function of me at 83, the rest of my life, I'd like to encourage people, because throughout my life I've had such encouragement, and I'm so appreciative of it. And if you encourage people, they do better than if you kick them about and tell them they failed to let them trust. So that's my view. I hope I haven't given offence. It has happened before. Thank you.
Well, we do have